Singing Dutchman Productions. Hello and welcome to Doug's Front Porch, a podcast where I get to sit down with friends old and new and have honest conversations. Today I welcome George Reppert to the front porch, someone who I've just recently gotten to know, but I'm looking forward to this conversation so that I get to know George a lot better. George, welcome to the front porch.
Well, it's good to be here.
George, I want to start with this. When I emailed you and asked if you'd be willing to come up on the show, this was your response. Doug, sure, what would you like to discuss? Booze, cars, entertainment industry, owning a head shop in the late 60s, living in homeless shelters even though I was never homeless, hog calling at the Kutztown Folk Festival, or just some fascinating life experiences that I was fortunate enough to have, like drinking whiskey with the last man to walk on the moon, or dating Susie Chapstick Chaffee, or late night conversations with Livingston Taylor and Taj Mahal. And I thought to myself, holy cow, George must be the most interesting man in the world after reading all that.
Well, I was very fortunate. I've been very fortunate in my life, all my life.
Well, there's a lot there to unpack, but I always like to start every interview kind of the same way. Could you tell everybody where you grew up and a little bit about your childhood? Did you have siblings? Maybe what did your parents do? Just so we can kind of think a little bit about what was the formational or foundational years for you, George.
Okay, well, it's very simple. I was born in close to a town called Burnsville, Pennsylvania. Grew up we had an apple orchard and a turkey farm. And really that was my time job because he worked with textile machine work. And my mother was also from Burnsville. She's a looking bill. There are a couple of those out there. It took a long time for me to develop into the person I am today.
Can I ask you, what did growing up on a farm do for you as a person? Do you think it instilled certain things in you?
Well, growing up on a farm was one thing. Growing up on a farm with my dad my dad was very creative. I think he finished maybe 6th grade, maybe 7th grade. I don't give him a couple of old bricks and piece of steel from junkyard and an old potbelly stove, and he'd make a beautiful outdoor fireplace. He built his own walk-in refrigerator. He could do anything. I mean, he taught me how to stop a leak in a gas tank with a bar of soap.
Yeah, skills that can only be learned that way, I think, too, from like mouth to ear type thing. Yeah, unreal. Well, George, you gave me this list of things. I'm just curious. I'm going to pick one out and you talk a little bit about it. Owning a head shop in the late 60s. Tell me about that. And we probably have to define for our audience, because there might be people listening to this that might not even know what a head shop is or was. So we might have to explain that too, George.
Okay, well, head shop, it was more of a curio and boutique shop. I had clothing. I had some interesting minerals, crystals, of course. And a funny story, I had 2 shops. I had one down in St. Peter's Village and one in West Reading. And the one in West Reading was very interesting because I used to have a lot of older women stopping by to check it out. And one day, 2 women walked up to the counter and they're looking at my geodes and crystals and amethyst and everything I had in my display. And the one woman looked at the other one and said, "Martha, doesn't this man have beautiful geodes?" And I mean, I'm sorry, gonads. She called them gonads. And I, of course, thanked her. and a head shop, back then, in the early 70s, um, the they would, well, marijuana was kind of starting out. It was kind of a cottage industry, you could say. I did not sell, by the way, but we had a lot of customers stop in, and we had roach clips, so forth. But some of them were beautiful jewelry, and one was a crucifix. And if you moved the ball up and down, it would open up the clip. And I sold a lot of them to the women at that were going to on their way to mass. And I actually had a priest come in and buy one. So,
You know, that's good. Well,
but
what
anyway,
what what got you into that in the first place? You just had you thought this is something I can do, and you just set up shop, or how'd that come about?
well, actually, it became available. There was a shop that became available down in St. Peter's Village, and I opened it up down there. So it was just basically no planning at all, which was probably why it's not there today. Other than the fact head shops are not in vogue today, but well, I guess they are but they're called boutiques.
Yeah, right.
So,
Well, let's move on to another thing from your list that you sent me that I'd love to hear a little bit more about. Living in homeless shelters, even though I was never homeless. What's that all about?
that was a fantastic experience. Everyone around here knows Craig Poole. Craig Poole is, I guess, president, general manager of DoubleTree in Reading. Called me up and asked me if I would be interested in helping out with a fundraiser for a place called Hope Rescue Mission. So I said, yeah. Well, I'd like to meet the people and find out more about it. So he invited me down to the hotel, and I met the director and one of his partners, and we sat and talked. I said, sure, I'll be happy to do this, but I basically I want to learn more about the shelter. So he said, I think I'd like to stay there for a week. And they were kind of shocked, but very welcoming. So I went in, checked in just like anyone would that would be in need of shelter. And I lived among the guests there at the homeless shelter for a week. I met incredible people.
Yeah, I can only imagine what that must have been like. Can you share some lessons that you learned from that? Like, what's something that you took away after that week was over that you never thought you would have experienced, or that something that it taught you that you never would have imagined you would have taken away?
Well, the biggest lesson is that we're all just one event away from being homeless. Every one of us, a catastrophe of any type. Um, and I I did start. Actually, that really was a impetus of my starting my travels with Jesus, to be honest with you. And every day every day you wake up, and you a lot of the people in there are it's almost robotic. They're just getting up and doing their thing and moving on. But there's so many up in there that are so talented and have this opportunity uh, at the shelter to get their life together. Um, I learned a lot. I met a lot of fantastic people. I learned a lot, obviously, about life, and how we're basically living on the edge every day. I mean, we think we have all the security, um, but it could disappear just in a moment. And um, you find out a true appreciation, um, and how much God can mean to your life.
Yeah. Well, I can only imagine. I can only imagine how that probably completely changes your perspective on everything once you look through that lens that most of us never ever look through or even think about looking through. And you had that opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm still communicating with a number of the guests there. Um, I mean, they've gone on, started new families and new careers. I was fortunate enough to have um, one of the fellows came to me, because I talked to them, and they knew I wasn't homeless. They knew was there just to find out more about the shelter. Some of them were shy, some were not, some of them were very welcoming. Um, but this one fellow just wanted to be a truck driver, and I helped him get his CDL license. And now he's driving cross country, and he loves his life. He loves his position. He loves what he's doing. He has a family now. Um, he settled down, a home, everything. Uh, I mean, they're not all success stories like that, but there are many. There are many, and a lot of the success is due to the people in at the Burke at the Hope Rescue Mission.
I'll definitely put a link to the Hope Rescue Mission in the show notes for anybody that wants to learn more about their mission and what they do. But I think it also impresses upon me, your story just right there, is that one person has the ability to completely change somebody's life if you're willing to take that step, which is a huge lesson in life to learn too. And sometimes it can be the smallest thing that you could do that could totally change someone else's life in a very positive way.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that, and you know, there are other shelters in Berks County and Lancaster County and well, all across the country that you know just step up and help out. Anyway,
Yeah, well, that's no, that was a great. Thank you so much for sharing that story because it gives the audience some insight into an aspect of our society that a lot of us just completely turn off from and don't even give it the time of day. Often I think about it, for example, in the church that I attend, every we have a different partner every month that we donate money towards, and 1 month every year is for our local homeless shelter here in Center County. And it's one thing to say, oh, here's $25, but have no idea like what that place actually does, or what that money's used for, or how it benefits those people. So I think I thank you for sharing that at least your personal experience with an organization like that. That's heavy, but it's good stuff, and I think we need to know more about. But let's turn that was some pretty serious stuff. So let's turn a little bit not so serious. My goodness, one thing that I've recognized through your social media and having listened to you do other interviews other places is that you have this concept known as, and you call yourself the Social Chemist. Let's talk about that aspect of your life, please.
the Social Chemist. Yes. Well, I always kind of been involved in the hospitality industry. Besides being in the car business, I was in the car business for almost 30 years. But while I was in the car business, I actually would tend bar. Started tending bar as soon as I was 21, I believe. And my primary job was basically selling cars, but the afterwards I go and tend bar, and because I just enjoyed people, I enjoyed meeting people. Um, it was a great opportunity. So I learned a little bit about liquor, and one day I had Brad, I idea that I needed another job after spending maybe 58, 60, 70 hours a week selling cars. I needed another job to supplement my income. So I opened up a restaurant bar. Um, and the bar was okay. Money was okay, but the problem is, uh, well, it wasn't a problem, it was an opportunity. The best way to make money in the restaurant business is by selling it. So I sold it, and my sales rep, who was for Southern Wine and Spirits, and I became friends. And he just got a promotion, and I said, "Hey, I need something to do. I'm getting out of the car business. I'm not enjoying it anymore. I'm not enjoying the the it's a difficult business. It always has been. It's worse today, by the way. But I said, I'd like your old job. He said, no, you don't. Yeah. I said, yeah, I do. So after about 6 months, I must have sent him 6 or 7 resumes, one every month. I just sent it, kept sending it. And he finally called me up and said, you're serious? You really do want this? I said, yeah. So I came down, filled out an application, and then that's when I started in the liquor business. But one person I met before I got in the liquor business was a guy by the name of Booker No. Booker No is Jim Beam's grandson, and he got me interested in whiskey. He was a fantastic guy. I learned so much about whiskey and life in the distilling business from him alone. And then fortunately, his son took over as a master distiller at Jim Beam, and I became very good friends with Freddie now. But anyway, so going back to the Social Chemist, I enjoy teaching about spirits. I'm fascinated by whiskeys, how whiskey is, it starts out clear, beautiful like water, and then but it becomes gold when it's married in the barrel. 100% of the color of whiskey comes from the barrel and from the wood, because they burn the inside of the barrel, they charcoal it, and the from the winters when the whiskey contracts, and then in the summer when it expands, it keeps going in and out of that wood, and that's what's bringing the flavors and the colors and all the wonderful goldness to whiskey. So I like teaching it, and that's how the Social Chemist came about. And that's how, by the way, that's how I got to drink whiskey with the last man to walk on the moon.
Yeah, could you real quickly? Could you tell that story just real quickly, please?
A friend of mine asked me to do a whiskey tasting for a group of military people down in Philadelphia, and the guest speaker there was Gene Cernan, and he's the last man to walk on the moon. To this day, he's still the last man to walk on the moon that we know of. He was such a fascinating guy. He would. I got to spend some time with him before the event, and we were just sitting down with a glass of whiskey and talking about. And he didn't want to talk about his experiences. He wanted to know about you. He was such a sincere person. He looked at you intently as he was as you were conversing. Fascinating person. And I asked him what it was like, and he said, "Well, it was my job, and it was a wonderful experience. And I I thank God every day I got that experience, just like I thank God every day that I get to experience the things I do.
That's crazy. All right, I want to pick your brain. I got this expert here on the front porch. Tell the audience, and I'm going to ask you some questions about whiskey in particular, just because I think there's a lot of people that. We have all these terms that we throw around, or the average guy walks into the state store here in Pennsylvania and you have an aisle of this and an aisle of that. But I want your definition of these terms. So, first off, what's the difference between whiskey spelled with an EY and whiskey spelled with a Y? Or is there no difference?
Well, there's definitely a difference. And it's basically depends on the country it's being produced. Um, it was originally it was originally they started spelling it differently in Ireland because they wanted to set themselves apart from Scotch whiskey. And I don't know if you ever heard the term Ardgabra, which means forever Irish or forever Ireland. And Aaron is spelled with an E. So they just added the E to the whiskey. And that's how that came about.
And an American whiskey, we tend to spell it with the E or without the E?
Well, we all do, except for they all do, I should say, except for Maker's Mark. And Maker's Mark is that's a marketing thing with Maker's Mark because they were Scottish. And they decided they wanted to go back to their heritage, even though they were making an American bourbon in their marketing plan. You know, the same person. Well, it was Bill Samuel's wife who came up with the idea, and she's the one that also started dipping the bottles in the red wax. But yeah, in the United States, it's almost all spelled with an E. Japan is spelled without the E. Japanese whiskeys are spelled without the E. And that's because they emulate a lot of the Scottish characteristics of whiskey. In Scotland, they use barley primarily for, to be single malt whiskey, it has to be 100% barley. So when they started making their whiskey, they made it with 100% barley. So they spelled it without the E.
So. Man, you just brought up a bunch of words on my list here. Okay, tell the audience, when you hear someone say, I'll take a Scotch, what is Scotch?
Okay, they're actually two Scotches. You have a single malt and a blended Scotch. Single malt Scotch simply is made in Scotland, 100% barley. It has to be produced, bottled, everything in Scotland to be called Scotch. Now, to be a single malt, it has to come from one distillery. Now, this is a little confusing, but to make a consistent product, because every barrel of whiskey you taste is going to be a little different because of the position in the warehouse or the rack house or the rick house or whatever country you're in. They call them something different, but it's basically a warehouse where you store the whiskey. And they're stacked in the rick house, and it's not air conditioned. Generally, it's not heated, so it does get to experience the expansion and contraction, which is necessary for the product to age and become a nice product. So that's the single malt. Comes one distillery, and but they are blended because they'll take product from this barrel that was up in the upper left-hand corner of the barn, and the other barrel is in the lower right corner. They maturate differently, so they age differently. So they blend them together so that every time it's a consistent product. Now, that's not a blended whiskey. A blended whiskey is a combination of as many as 18 different whiskeys. And the blending started out with the Chivas brothers. The Chivas brothers had a department store, and one of the products they sold was whiskey, and they'd have it down in the basement in barrels. And if you wanted to buy a bottle of whiskey, a lot of times you'd bring your own bottle in, or they supplied the bottle, and they would tap off a little whiskey, and that's how you got it. But one time they'd get a barrel from someone, and it was fantastic. The next time, the technical term they used was, if it wasn't quite the way you want it to taste, they said it tasted like shite. And so the Chivas brothers came up with this process of taking all these different whiskeys, blending them together, and then adding a neutral grain spirit. Neutral grain spirit can be made from anything. It can be made from corn, any grain, and the wheat would soften it and give it a little better, a little more palatable. So you have all these whiskeys blended together, so that every time you bought a bottle of Chivas, it was going to be the same whiskey. Then there was Johnny Walker and everyone else, and those are all blended whiskeys. So that's the difference.
Yeah. And what is bourbon?
Bourbon's my favorite. I'm sitting here. I guess I should have my camera on. I'm sitting here surrounded by about it's probably around 300 bottles right here in my office, and a lot of bourbon bottles. So anyway, I just turned around and looked at them. I just started to get the foot clamped, as they say. But bourbon is it has to be at least 51% corn liquor. And you can use barley and wheat. There are wheated bourbons. Wheated bourbons are very popular because of, well, let's say two products, Maker's Mark and Pappy Van Winkle. Those are wheated bourbons. Wheated bourbons are softer. They're in tune with today's American palate. Back in the old days, it was not the sought after product that it is today. But yeah, that's bourbon. It has to be made in America. You have to use a brand new oak barrel. You cannot use a used oak barrel. 100%. Well, that's not 70% of all other whiskeys that are produced are normally aged in a used bourbon barrel. But bourbon has to be made in and maturated in a brand new American oak barrel, and that was actually passed in Congress by the Coopers Union. They pushed that because they were running out of work because everyone was using used barrels. So they said, well, if you want to make bourbon, you have to use a brand new barrel.
All right, George, I'm going to put you on the spot because you said you do these tastings for people. Let's imagine I call you up and I say, George, I don't like whiskey, but I'd love to try one of these tastings. What do you put before me, and how do you get me or anybody to appreciate whiskey?
Well, the first thing I don't do is give you an Islay whiskey because an Islay whiskey is very peaty. It's very, and my wife would say it's like licking the bottom of a shoe. So what I would do is present you with something like a wheated whiskey, like Maker's Mark. Then you're going to add water to it. The best. I mean, people think that you get a whiskey that's 101 proof, and you got to show your manhood, and, you know, shoot that down. That's not how you enjoy whiskey. That's how you get drunk. And getting drunk is not necessarily enjoying whiskey. Um, so you take the whiskey and you bring it down to the proof that you enjoy. And actually, Booker used to take a full 16-ounce, a pint glass basically, and pack it with ice. And he put in his 112, 113 proof Booker's whiskey in the glass, and he let it melt. And he'd carry that around for a couple of hours, as the ice melts into the whiskey, it becomes a different whiskey. And that's the best way to find out what proof you like it at, because as it's becoming watered down, the taste changes, the feel of the whiskey changes. It just every sip then becomes a different whiskey. So what you have to learn is where you like your whiskey. Do you like it at 100 proof? Do you like it at 50 proof? He said the best way to enjoy whiskey is about 60 proof, which is 30% alcohol. The rest is water. So, and that's how I get them started. And then also sometimes, you do the adding of ginger ale or 7-Up or Sprite or Coke or whatever flavor you like. And then wean yourself off of the sodas, and just enjoy your whiskey like you enjoy it.
Yeah, I think all too often, if you think about how society has portrayed whiskey, particularly in like Western films, it was that, cowboy coming up to the bar and just, like you said, leaning on the bar and doing shot after shot of whiskey. And
Yeah.
I did that in college, and I know that it wasn't enjoyable.
Yeah, exactly.
But I've learned to, and maybe this is just as I've gotten older and my palate has changed, but I've learned to, I've gained a much greater appreciation for whiskey, as a spirit, than I ever had when I was younger. And I don't know if is that pretty typical for most people or not?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. If someone becomes intoxicated at one of my tastings, I'm doing something wrong, because that's not how you become educated. That's how you become dumber. So, yeah, you're really educating your palate. You're teaching it what it likes. I mean, your palate will tell you what it likes, and which in turn you like.
One thing I was curious your input on, in the last couple of years, of course, in Pennsylvania here, we've seen this explosion in craft brewery, but we've also seen an explosion in distilleries and new distilleries. What do you think is one of the reasons why all of a sudden there's all these little mom and pop or little family distilleries popping up all over the Commonwealth?
Well, I don't know the reason, because other than somebody might want to develop a small fortune. But unfortunately, you have to start with a big fortune to get a small fortune. The distillery business is difficult. It's hard to make it. It's hard to make it into a real business unless you want to just have the enjoyment of opening up your barn or wherever you're producing your whiskey. Those are some of my favorites. The small distilleries that just have it in their backyard, and they have maybe a little bar set up. Now, they are licensed. They have to be licensed. They have to be both federally and state licensed to do this. But like in Pennsylvania, if you produce something in Pennsylvania and you're licensed, you can actually have your own little barn, your bar, where people can come in and try your product. Um, and again, those are some of my favorites. And it's not necessarily because it's a great product. It's just because it's a great experience. I love visiting these small distilleries all over Pennsylvania. Excuse me. Anyway.
I think you're right, because a lot of the ones that I think they're selling, of course they're selling their product, but they're also selling the experience too.
Correct.
I just think around, like, in the area where I live, within the last, well, I don't know, let's say 5 years, there has been at least one, two, three. I can think of at least 4 or 5 distilleries that have opened out of nowhere. Before we had a couple breweries, but there was no distilleries. And now all of a sudden, like I said earlier, I can drive easily to 5 different ones, and they all have their own kind of different ambiance and different flair. And some of them are just making clear spirits, and some are making, whiskeys and things like that. But I think a lot of people are going more for the ambiance and getting a cocktail than anything else. So I think that's great. It's filling a void, I guess, and a void that apparently people wanted to have filled, the way it seems.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a great industry for Pennsylvania. It's the one thing that the PLCB has done, Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board, has done that's been smart. And I guess I shouldn't say this, but there are not a lot of things that they've done that's smart. But government should never be in business. But anyway,
All right,
that's for another time.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to ask you one last question related to this. Okay, imagine somebody's listening to this podcast and they're like, I've always been a beer guy, or I only drink wine, and now after listening to this interview, I'd like to try something. And they walk into the state store, and they want to get one bottle of a whiskey. You can name drop if you want. It doesn't matter to me. But what would you suggest to that person that has, really no experience and can't get to somebody that's doing a tasting or something like that, and you tell them, just go to the state store and pick up a bottle of this to kind of like start out? What would you suggest?
I would suggest pick up a bottle. As people always ask me, what's my favorite whiskey? And I'll tell them it's the one that's in my hand. Because I can, all of these whiskeys sitting here next to me and in back of me and in front of me, all over. They're all my favorites. And they're not my favorites because they're sitting here. They're my favorites because I know I'm going to enjoy something about that whiskey. It might be the flavor. It might be the feel. It might be just all the characteristics put together. The important thing is to drink the whiskey the way you enjoy it. If you shooting whiskey is not enjoying it. Taking a shot of whiskey is not enjoying it. That's celebration, basically. Add water, add ice, add Coke, add coffee. I love a little whiskey and coffee, and Irish coffee. Look at that. How big that is. But just grab a bottle, grab something you feel that you can afford. Not every whiskey that's $100 is worth $100. There's some great $19 bottles of whiskey out there, and that's where I would start, at the bottom shelf. Go down there and pick out. I'm going to say Old Crow. Old Crow is a fantastic bourbon. And it's, what is it, $17 a bottle, something like that. Start out there. And then when you have too much money, if you want to try a Pappy, go ahead. If you can find it, if you can, and you want to try something really nice, I'd suggest something like a Maker's Mark, because it's a nice wheated whiskey. So there's a little name dropping. Because of my relationship with Jim Beam products, that's always my go-to. and Maker's Mark is one of the Jim Beam products. So, excuse me.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your vast knowledge, George. We probably only scratched the surface for sure. But I appreciate it. At least gave me, those are always some things that I always think about. Like, when people throw these terms around, oh, it's a bourbon, oh, it's a scotch. And I wonder how many people actually know, like, what's the difference or what does that mean, and whiskey alone. I think, you can walk into that state store and there's a that's the largest section of besides wine. I mean, we're talking spirits. That's usually the largest section with the most quantity is whiskeys. And I think to myself, my gosh, if I knew nothing and I'm standing here looking at all these bottles, it's like throwing darts. I'm just gonna pick one and go. And your suggestion is to do that for the first time. Just pick one and see what you mess around with a little bit. Don't be afraid to experiment, right?
Yeah, and a great opportunity is coming up right here in Berks County. The Reading Science Center, which is a great place to take your kids, has one major fundraiser every year, and that's their whiskey experiment. This year is going to be at the DoubleTree in Reading, and just go snag a ticket and actually, you're there at the DoubleTree, you might as well get a room too, and you're gonna get the opportunity to experience about probably in the hundreds of different types of whiskeys. So there'll be local distilleries and international distilleries there. So, but take an opportunity like that. Find a whiskey tasting event. And that's the best way to learn what you like.
The other thing I've learned to do since I've gone to a bunch of these different distilleries is I'm never afraid to ask whoever's behind the bar. I'm not afraid to play dumb or be, to sound stupid. And a lot of times they're so excited to show off their product and, talk about how they made it and what goes into it that you get a full education just sitting there talking to the bartender, or sometimes it's the owner who's actually making the stuff. So I would also recommend anybody that's going to these small distilleries to definitely, people want to share what they know, and it makes it a much more enjoyable experience for yourself as well, because then you know what you're drinking. So
absolutely.
Well, George, we end every conversation the same way here on the podcast, and that's with 10 quick questions.
Oh my goodness!
Oh, you're gonna be fine. It's gonna be fun, actually. So here we go. Question number one. I'll be curious to hear what you say, given what we've just talked about. Question number one: what is your morning drink of choice?
Well, my morning drink of choice is coffee. Yeah, normally. But there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with adding a little whiskey to that.
There we go. Question number two: who is a go-to musical artist or group for you?
Oh my goodness! I have such eclectic taste when it comes to music. I mean, I'll listen to. I love Bach actually, and I love rock and roll. my favorite artist. I don't have a favorite artist.
Yeah, it is. It's a tough question to answer, and I know that. Yeah.
It's wow. I wasn't ready for that one.
That's fine. You did drop a name. You said Bach. Well, that's fine.
There you go.
I like Bach.
There you go. I do too.
All right. Question number three: what movie can you watch over and over again and it never gets old?
I guess A Few Good Men.
Oh, great film. Yes. Great film. All right. Question number four: what is the last thing that you read?
The last thing I read was about an hour ago, and that's the Bible.
Okay. All right. Question number five: what's your favorite pizza topping?
Pepperoni.
Okay. Laying on the beach or going for a hike?
Well, that you mean when I could.
Okay.
I definitely would do that hike.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not a beach guy.
Yeah, me either.
I get bored quickly.
Okay. Yeah, right. Okay. You have invited me over for dinner. What are you making?
Pot roast.
Okay, and what are you serving with it to drink? If I'm coming to your house, I'm hoping to experience the George Reppert full show. So we're having pot roast. What are we drinking with that? What would you serve if someone was coming?
Well, with it, beforehand, we'd have we're going to have a rye whiskey,
Okay.
and then during dinner, I'm going to have a
Okay.
Cabernet Sauvignon. That's one of my favorites. So, um, and then afterwards, maybe we'll have a cocktail, but probably not. We'll probably have some more whiskey.
Okay. There was one thing I did as a side note, and I know you'll definitely echo this. I think most Americans don't realize the importance of that whiskey has played in our history here in this country.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we had
Yeah.
there was a rebellion over whiskey taxes in the 1700s.
Yep.
And when you look at, I think most Americans just think we've always been a beer country, and I mean, beer has played a major role in our society, in our history too. But I think we often overlook or don't even know, particularly in colonial America, the importance that distilling had in our history, really.
Yeah. And Pennsylvania,
Yeah, particularly.
especially Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And that's because of limestone. You need good limestone water to make good whiskey. So
There you go, people.
that's why they moved to Kentucky.
Oh, because there was limestone there.
Limestone and the farmland. Not only Kentucky and Pennsylvania being commonwealths, that's not the only thing they have in common. They're very, very much alike.
So there we go. There we go. All right, question number 8. Where is a dream vacation destination for you?
A dream place I've never been that I want to go, I have to go sometime, is Scotland. I've never been there. I've been to a lot of distilleries all over the world, but never to Scotland.
Okay. Okay. What's something you're afraid of?
Not afraid of much.
Okay.
Uh, you know, I'm afraid for future generations. But myself, it would take a lot to terrify me.
Okay, sounds good. All right, last question. Your life has been full of events. So I'm curious to see what you say for this one. What job, other than one that you have had, would you love to have?
I think I've had them all. You know, maybe maybe a race car driver.
Oh,
Even though I've done that, but never professionally. I've done hill climbing and all that type of thing, but never professionally. And
okay.
I think that's it.
All right. That sounds good. Well, George, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show and getting to know you a little bit better, and what you shared with the audience. I mean, there's a lot that people can take away from this, even if they aren't alcohol drinkers. I think you can still take away something for sure. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing your stories and your knowledge with all of us here on the front porch.
Well, it was my pleasure. Other than getting up so early.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but now you got this checked off the list, right? So the rest of the day's
there
downhill.
you go.
All right, George. Thank you so much. I hope to talk to you again in the very near future.
As you say, Mock Scoot.
Hey, Mock Scoot. Thank you for listening to Doug's Front Porch, a conversational podcast with your host, Doug Maidenford. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. 5 stars only, please. Follow along on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just look for Doug's Front Porch. Also, please feel free to tell all of your friends about the show, and I'll see you all next time on My Front Porch.